Hi, and welcome to the Lasting Mission podcast. I'm the host for today, Britt Meyers, and I'm so thrilled to be joined by our guest, Matthew Landis, who has a really incredible story. I'm so excited to get into that today. Before we do that, we just want to remind everybody watching or listening that you can find the latest news, content, updates about Mission Roll Call and what's happening in the veteran community through our website at missionrollcall.org. So please check us out there and make sure that you're following along for more content like this. And Matthew, thank you so much for joining us today and just taking some time to share your story.
Absolutely. It's an honor, a pleasure to be here. I'm so glad we were able to meet.
I'm glad too. And I think just to set the stage for everybody, especially the veteran community, just want to kind of jump in with your status as a veteran and what took you into the military back earlier in your life.
Well, several things. So I grew up by the West Point Military Academy right there in New York. And I always had that kind of environment near me. I would sneak up to West Point and play basketball with the cadets as a kid. So I was always inspired by, that Army Navy football games and seeing the jets fly over when they were playing Air Force and stuff. So there was something about the jets that really kind of caught my eye and my attention. And but I do come from a long line of members of my family that have all served in the military. My grandfather, Edward Micah, was on a submarine destroyer in World War II.
Cool.
And he had 9 brothers that all served in one way, shape, or form. They all served in the military. His son, my uncle, was a retired colonel in the United States Air Force. And it was 1989 when I actually had a scholarship to play basketball for Springfield College in Massachusetts. And on spring break, that all kind of came crashing down. And I made some really poor choices and was kind of in the process of deciding whether I wanted to go transfer to a different college to play ball. I wasn't happy at Springfield at all. Mm-hmm. And back then, like, transfers were like, what? Like, who transfers? Now everybody
doing it all the time.
Yeah, it's all the time. So, but I had God on my heart telling me that there was something else. There was something else I wanted that he wanted me to do. And on that spring break, there was a guy, I forgot his name completely, but he lived right next door. And I noticed every day that he'd come home and he had this sharp blue uniform on, driving a nice car. He had a nice apartment, like he had his life together. And one day he just said to me, like, pretty much like, what are you doing with your life? Kind of. And he was like, why don't you join the Air Force? I was like, all right, well, what are the steps here? So I went to take the ASVAB test and scored high enough and was accepted into the Air Force. I made the decision to go serve my country while I was still trying to figure out how basketball could become a role in that. And actually the recruiter did an amazing job by kind of selling me on this viewpoint, if you will, that I could play basketball in the Air Force and travel on this base team thing. And I kind of didn't put that into the perspective at the time. I was still 18, 19 years old, but we were at war. We had just literally, when I was in basic training, the first Gulf War basically started. The bombing of the Air Force bombed, and that whole basketball thing kind of shifted away. So I went from, it seemed like one day spinning a basketball on my fingers to the next day wearing a uniform. It just happened so fast. And that's kind of how I got drawn to it. And later, when I kind of share a little bit about my story, if you will, it will reflect back on how that decision was made, that choice of dropping a college scholarship. It'll come into focus later. And I will apologize ahead of time. I do have a TBI. So sometimes my dates will get mixed up and you'll be like, I thought he was in Texas and now he's in Colorado, but in the end, it all makes sense. So,
okay. Yeah, totally understandable. It's your story, so nobody's going to fact check you on
Yeah.
it.
Right on.
At least I won't.
Right,
When
right,
you had said before, we kind of debriefed on your military experience, it wasn't the best experience for you while you were in, right? And
right.
your transition, I think, even more so. But what was your experience like in the Air Force?
So I went in pretty much open-minded. I went in as a what's called open general, and I allowed the military. I gave them the choice to a lot of people. You can wait if you want to be a medic or if you want to do a certain thing. I just went in and said I'll do whatever, and they put me in Space Command. So I served in support of a NORAD system in Colorado that tracks. Um, let's just say they track every heat-seeking substance that is out there that's launched. So we observed and supported the mission launch systems and air defense systems during the entire first Gulf War. But it wasn't so much my AFSC, if you will, my job, as it was the people I began to associate with
Mm-hmm.
and the poor choices that I, as a young man, were making in the military. And one thing I guess I just wasn't prepared for is like before I went in, there was really I was a basketball player. That's all I did. And when I went in after that, it became this party scene, and I really wanted to be part of that. And so I dove into a lot of heavy drinking, and not knowing my father, who I lost about 6 months before I went in the military, I found out he had overdosed and passed away. I didn't know him very well. Later would come to find out that him and his family had a long line of alcoholism kind of running in the family. And that kind of came into more focus as my military time progressed. So did my partying and the people in my uh, in my base. Even it was just party after party after party after party, concert after concert, and party after party. And like I said, I just wanted to fit in, and I wanted to be part of um, the fun. And back then, that was what you did. You just kind of you hung out and we drank, and that was kind of how I spent most of that my 4 years in the military. It was a big long party. And so when I made the transition from I got married, I had 3 daughters, and but by the time I excuse me, by the time I went to go reenlist, I had to make a decision because they were at the time they were downsizing. Uh, the president was Clinton. A lot of my type job and civil engineer type work was being outsourced, and I went in to reenlist, and they were like, "Hey, we'd love to have you. You're a good airman. We'd love to keep you, but you have to go back to tech school and retrain." And I was like, I had just had my first daughter, and I didn't want to go back to tech school, so I chose to get out and become a civilian. And 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 during that, I began immediately to kind of see the effect of the loss of structure, if you will, in my life. And that loss of structure and camaraderie um, kind of led me to make some more poor choices in my civilian life. So that was kind of how um, I hope that kind of gives you kind of a ballpark idea of how it went and where I was at during my transition.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, it really does. And I think you painted a good picture of just what that can look like and kind of even some of the lack of family support, you having lost your dad right before you went in, just all those things compounding and,
right,
family history that you weren't aware of, that, probably didn't help either, right, on some of
right,
these choices and how it was impacting your life.
right.
So once you were out, you have a young daughter, probably you're married, I
Yes,
think, right at this point. Okay.
yes.
Did you? was that when you first started to notice that you were maybe in crisis, or what was that like transition period for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my wife and I had moved up to the mountains in Colorado. I loved Colorado. I loved the outdoors. And in the mountains, um, I was kind of isolated. We lived in a really tiny town, and in that isolation, I continued to really drink and discover other. I began to use drugs, and the I guess the transition when I knew, if I may just share, start being open with you and just tell you.
Yeah.
So like, I noticed that I had a fall in I forget the year, but I had a fall, and I remember at the time I'd only really drank. I was a drinker, and I was still like going to work, like they call a functioning alcoholic, and I had fallen, dislocated my shoulder. I had to have reconstructive surgery on my shoulder, 2 surgeries, and I remember the time that I got a prescription for my first opioid, and I remember on the bottle looking at it and it's saying do not mix with alcohol, and I just completely disregarded that. And I remember taking my very first Percocet, like I took it 5 minutes ago. I remember it so well because I just remember this feeling coming upon me, and I just went, holy cow. And in that moment right there, that's when it began, the downfall. So and to kind of give you a quick overview of how that looks, in the year 2000, I was living in Breckenridge, Colorado. I was married. By then, I now had 2 other daughters. So I had 3 girls, and I had a wife. And that was in 2000. And by 2003, I was living estranged from my family. I had 23 felony counts against me for doctor shopping. That's how the seeking of the pills had taken over my life. And I had moved to New York. I had chased what I thought was going to be a solution to fixing the problems that I didn't even know were inside me yet. And all stemming from childhood trauma and the alcoholism, and the combination of the two were just a deadly, deadly path to be walking on. And so I thought through isolation. I thought through relationships. I thought through, you know, just drugs and alcohol, that those were the solutions to the self-love problem that I was lacking. And I'm not afraid to say that the inner child in me, everyone has an inner child with them, but the inner child in me was screaming for help. And I was spiritually broken. I wound up moving kind of in New York from place to place. And in 2012-ish, 2012-ish, no, that would be wrong. It would be, I'd say 2014. I had found other sources of drugs. I had transitioned from just opiates to, I had found, I forgot the name of it. It's people take it for if you have a ADHD disease. It's like
Oh, like Adderall?
that's it. Yes.
Yeah.
Adderall. Whew,
Mm-hmm.
that was a no. And so I left for my first rehab in 2014, and I was completely spiritually broken, had no relationship with my family, no contact with my family. They had got to the point, all that bouncing around I was doing in New York, they were like, we're done. And to this day, I'm so grateful that they did that. And I went to this rehab in Florida. I wound up getting kicked out of that rehab, and for pursuing a relationship with someone in rehab, that I wound up, after she graduated rehab, we took off, went across country, went to Colorado. And I highly advise anyone going through a rehab, the best thing is from my own experience is to not get into a relationship with someone in rehab and try to carry that over into your recovery, because that takes away from the entire purpose. And so I made that huge mistake. And that was, though, the true beginning of when I got opened to the help that I needed. And if you're willing, I can share more about that, but I'm sure you have other questions. I'm sorry.
No, I'm totally willing to hear more about that. And I just thank you too for your vulnerability and sharing that so far. And I mean,
Yeah.
at this point, you're talking 14, 15 years that you're struggling with
Yes.
substance abuse addiction. It's a lot. And I know it compounded. It was even more than that. Like we've talked before, the
Yeah.
most of your adult life you were fighting. Um,
Yes.
and just the toll that must have taken every facet of your life. Just
Yeah.
your bravery to share that. I really appreciate and think that will touch people who are listening to this, who, whether they've gone through something like that themselves or they love someone who has. I
Yes.
think I told you this before. My sibling, we have different moms, and his mom was in a car accident and she got addicted to opioids after that car accident and
Yes.
spent much of his childhood in federal prison. And it just is, on paper, you wouldn't have known. You will
Right.
this like totally normal for what that is family. And it's
Right.
just crazy how quickly just some introduction to that drug just changed our lives,
Yes.
her life, but all of our lives. So I have a lot of
Absolutely.
compassion for you in that part for
Well,
sure.
thank you, Britt. I appreciate
Yeah.
that. I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
Um,
So yeah, you were saying like going into that next phase of your story. So you come out of rehab. At this point, are you in Colorado again?
yeah. So
Okay.
I'm in Colorado. I'm with the girl I got kicked out of rehab. One thing that happened, though, and one positive thing that happened in that rehab, I was in pursuit. So all my stories, like, they all have this beginning, like, so there was this girl. I'm serious. And then it's like downfall. So it's
Oh
like,
no.
I've learned. No, you haven't. But so the thing is that in pursuit of trying to court this beautiful woman, she said to me one night, she said, "Would you like to go to Celebrate Recovery meeting with me?" And I was like, "What is that?" She said, "Celebrate Recovery. It's a faith-based, but to me it sounded like an oxymoron. Celebrate and recovery didn't sound. Why would I celebrate recovery? So, but I went, and that was my first introduction to how spiritually broken I was, and that I was really looking for something that was in me that I didn't really know yet. So, yes, we took off to Colorado, and in there things just completely fell apart between us, but we were still communicating. So she got extradited back to Georgia. So now I'm in Colorado alone, and I remember it was just like, hey, the whole I can't live without you thing. And so I get in my car and I drove across the country from Colorado to Georgia, with everything I had in the car, all the stuff that I had in my house up when I had left it in New York. I put that stuff in storage,
Hmm.
and wound up putting some stuff in my car that I thought, I needed for the moment, but it wasn't much. It was some clothes and stuff. So I drove across the country, got to Georgia, and we just completely collapsed in Georgia. So there I was in Georgia now, no job, no car, no income, but heavily using and drinking heavily. And it all came crashing down. It all came crashing down big time. It was my birthday on July 22nd in a Burger King parking lot in Atlanta, Georgia. And I had woke up that morning, and sure enough, there was a girl that I saw, and I asked for a cigarette. And an hour later, I woke up in a Burger King parking lot with the EMTs around me, pushing Narcan into my head. I wasn't receiving it, and they had to bag my mouth and were trying to push oxygen into my brain. And a remarkable thing happened, though. The EMT from that she came to the hospital with me, and she stayed there. And I remember waking up from coming out of this fog, And I remember her saying to me, and she looked just like my mom. And I swear she was an angel. She said to me, honey, I don't know what you're doing down here in Georgia, but you've got out-of-state plates. Your car was just repossessed. You don't have any money in your wallet. We took that for you, but there's nothing in it. But I saw in it that you're a veteran. And if you're open to it, there's a place here that might be able to get you some help because you need it. And she told me, when we got there, you were gone today. You were gone. And if somebody had not called 911 and we didn't break the car open to get you, you would have died. And I heard that, but it didn't settle in. It didn't settle in until long after. And what I mean by that is, I mean, you can hear that, but when I was so deep in heavy use and so whatever, it's not what I was thinking about. So I did listen to her though. I went to the VA, but in Georgia, in Atlanta, Georgia, there was a long wait to get in, months. So they put me in town in Atlanta, downtown, right in Fulton County, the Salvation Army. And so for months in that Salvation Army, you'd come and go. And I was getting kicked out of there. I was sleeping on the streets when I could. And finally, they even kicked me out. It's hard to get kicked out of the Salvation Army in Georgia, I'm telling you, but I did. And I wound up on the streets there for a while, just sleeping under the bridges. I made a cardboard sign. Mm-hmm. I was begging for money. I'd steal food from the grocery store so I could eat. And then I begged money so I could drink. And I did that until the VA opened a door and let me in. And I wound up going through that program. And I remember the day that I checked in, the lady kind of heard where I was. She got some feedback on me. And I remember her telling me, honey, I don't think you know how sick you are. And that didn't settle until long after. But yeah, that was the beginning of, I would say, my real long journey of identifying that I had a very serious problem that almost cost me my life, that now needed my full attention, or I was going to die just like my dad had done before I went in the military. I began to fight. I even remember this voice inside of me saying that you can't let your daughters get the phone call that you got, that your dad didn't make it. And so I began to fight, and it was hard, but I fought, and today I'm over 4 years sober, and it's been an amazing journey. And if time allows, I'd love to dive into a little bit more of that journey, because I think that that's a critical part that could help a lot of veterans.
Time allows. Yes, absolutely. I think too, I just wondered how your experience was with the VA once, you got past the wait time, and it sounds like you had a really great first interaction, but did you have like a good experience being able to get the resources and support you needed at that stage?
Very, very much. Yeah, that's another great question too. I did. Even though the VA is overwhelmed, and even though the VA was short-staffed, and their purpose was to help. It really was. Their purpose was to help us. And it can be very frustrating when you're trying to crawl through the red tape, and yet you're still dealing with the fog of an addiction. Everything becomes not real. But I remember them telling me, if you can just remember first thought, wrong thought. First thought, wrong thought. Just hold that. First thought, wrong thought. It'll get you through to where you can get some clarity and be able to see what's actually happening around you. And, unfortunately, my behavior stayed that very, very much out of control, to the point where I had got kicked out twice. And on my third time, each time I turned to the streets. But on my third time, I remember sitting at this board meeting with all these people that worked at the VA. And they were all there at this long table for me. And they told me, you got to go. Straight up, you have to go. We've talked about this. This isn't the first time. There are other veterans that are serious about their recovery that need a place. You have to go. And I remember literally begging them, please don't kick me out. And they couldn't. They were like, you've got to go. But they did help me try to find someplace else I could go. So I started throwing out applications to recovery centers all over the country, like every VA I could. And at this time, I didn't have any disability rating. I didn't have any PTSD or anything like that from anything. So I wound up getting accepted to the Sheridan VA, Wyoming facility. And in my opinion, and unfortunately, I've left out a lot of them, but I've been to several other VAs that in their treatments, but this one was different because to me, it was nestled right in the foothills, right in the mountains. It reminded me of Colorado, and it reminded me of some of the spirituality I began to feel inside me. I connect most with my Savior, God. I connect most with Him in the outdoors. The outdoors are me, and I feel grounded there. I feel safe there. Something about going to Wyoming began to shift in me. But along that journey to Wyoming, I for the first time, and now I was 45 years old, I believe, ish. I found meth, and that was absolutely. It was like the devil was just like, if I can't get him with this one, I'll try this one, and then that one, and then this one, and that one. And even on that one, it destroyed me. I mean, combining the alcohol with the other stuff, and then this, it was too much. And I wound up starting to develop seizures. That's how sick I got. But most importantly, what happened in Wyoming was I met the kindness and the love of a lot of good people. There were staff members there. There was a chaplain there that sat with me. He'd come to my bed every time I get kicked out, and I'd come back in. I'd always wind up in detox, and they'd sit with me and talk to me. And he sat with me this once, and he said, Matthew, you're not done here. You're not done. God has a bigger purpose for you. And you just got to stick it out. You got to stick it out. And he offered me to go to Celebrate Recovery again. And I was like, this is weird, so I started going to Celebrate Recovery. And as I get these little few weeks and maybe a month of sobriety, those were the times in the clarity of my mind I could see that there was something bigger in this God thing, if you will. There was something more purposeful in there for me, and that the answers I was looking for were not going to be found outside. And I mean, I got to the point in the VA that it was like, okay, it was like no more pencils, no more books. I've been to all the classes. I had gone for 2 years. I'd gone through every program. But yet there was still something missing in me. So I had this spiritual bankruptcy about myself, and I was seeking it in the outdoors. And one night, I remember it again, as clear as a bell. I went outside, 2 a.m., smoking a cigarette, and there was a peer support specialist, a VA peer support specialist, a true outdoors guy. And he was sitting there, and he goes, dude, where do you go every weekend? He was like, you get a backpack, you get a pass on Thursday, you go somewhere, and you go up to the mountain somewhere, and then you come back Sunday, usually late, but you come back, but you're happy, like you're different. What do you do up there? And I just told him, I was like, dude, I just hike. I hike, I set up my camp, and I take pictures with my phone. I feel I'm alone, and I love it, And he said, have you ever thought about doing something like different, like a long distance hike? And I never put the two and two together, but I needed more space. The VA was working to a point, but I wasn't able to apply what I was learning. For me, the biggest challenge I noticed was not what they were teaching. And it wasn't even in wanting to apply it. It was the gap between graduating sober and starting life. That, I mean, in when you walk out of the gates of a VA treatment center, I mean, for me, I was attacked immediately in my mind. Devil trying to get me. We're gonna get him with alcohol, and he had success at that. And this time, though, I had a purpose. I wasn't going to an apartment. I wasn't going to start a job. It was different. It was like, so he told me this in May of 2018, May. By July 13th, I was southbound on the Pacific Crest Trail. So I flew out from the Pacific Crest Trail. It goes 2,653 miles. Talk about long distance. 2,653 miles from Canada through Washington, Oregon, California, all the way to Mexico. And I was southbound on that trail within 2 months after him saying it. I knew that this is what I needed. So I became a southbound PCT hiker. And yeah, I remember the VA. I was so afraid to tell them. I was like, how are they going to think when I go to them and I tell them? They're like, what's your recovery plan? It was, I'm going hiking. But they were like, what can we do to help? What can we do to support you? And they came up with a plan for me. They came up with an action plan. Like, they were, number one, get to the airport, just simple, small steps. And it got me there. And on that trail hike, it was 5.5 months. On that hike, my life, the entire compass of my life began to change. I began to see love in other people in a way I had never dreamed was possible.
Thank you for joining us for part 1 of 2 of the incredible story of veteran Matthew Landis. Join Britt Meyers and The Lasting Mission next week as we dive back in.